Hello friends, and welcome to my channel. Well, I hope everybody has had a chance to get outside and enjoy some of this nicer weather now that spring has finally arrived. Here in Canada, we are currently in second winter, having had our first fake spring over the last couple of weeks. Fake spring is that short window of time that gives all Canadians hope, only to have that hope dashed by snowstorms and plummeting temperatures. But I try not to despair because second fake spring is just around the corner. Now, to my American friends, we really need to talk about measuring. Now, I'm pretty sure I've said somewhere on my channel at some point that Canada used to use the Imperial system, and sometime in the late 70s, we switched over to the metric system. And I was in high school at the time, and so I didn't learn metric until I was, I think, 15 or 16. And so I can say that I am completely bilingual in both forms of measurement. Now, if I'm being honest, even 45 plus years later, I still find myself converting things into feet and inches, except when it comes to miniatures. When I'm making miniatures, I work exclusively with the metric system. I just find that it's so much easier to measure out 41 millimeters than to measure out 1 and 29/32 of an inch. Now, I have always assumed that my American friends have exclusively used the Imperial system, but I've had quite a few comments recently on a few videos from Americans telling me that they use the metric system when they're making minis. So now I'm curious. Now in Canada, when you buy a ruler, you get both forms of measurements. You get inches on one side and millimeters, centimeters on the other. What I don't know is if rulers sold in the United States also have both forms of measurement, or do you just have the Imperial system on it? And if it does have the metric system on it, do you use metric or do you use Imperial? Now you know that for all the pieces that I make, if I can, I provide measurements in the description box. And I always put both because I'm always thinking about my American friends. But I'm curious if I need to continue to do that. So if you have an opinion or a preference, please let me know in the comment section below. Okay, on to today's project. So in today's video, I'm going to be making some bedside tables for the new bed that I've made. As always, your cutting instructions in both measurements are in the description box below. So let's get started. To start this project, I'm going to first bring in my two pieces marked A. These are the sides of the end table. And I'm going to start by making some measurements on those sides because we're going to be installing shelves, and I want the shelves to be nice and level and straight. I'm making these measurements along the long side of these pieces, and so I'm going to make a mark at 2.5 millimeters, 20.5 millimeters, 23 millimeters, and 38.5 millimeters. And I'll make those same measurements, of course, on both sides and draw those lines together. So if you're using the Imperial measurement system, those measurements are 3/32 of an inch, 25/32 of an inch, 7/8 of an inch, and 1.5 inches. We're going to make those same measurements on both pieces marked A. And here's what that will look like. So I'm going to put one of those pieces aside, and I'm going to bring in my 3 pieces marked B, and these are your shelf pieces. So for each of the 3 shelf pieces, we're going to put glue on one short side, and what I'm going to do is use my little corner piece here just to make sure it stays nice and square. So the piece I'm putting in here is the side, and that's going to push all the way into the corner, and then each of those shelves are going to come in and butt up against the side. So again, placing my glue on one short side of the shelf piece and placing that shelf in up against the side. Now I'm switching over to my 1, 2, 3 blocks here to keep everything square because unfortunately that little blue corner piece is just a little bit too big to put the rest of the shelves on. I'm lining up the second shelf now in between the 2 lines that are in the middle of the side piece. And then using my 1, 2, 3 blocks to make sure that they're standing nice and straight. Here's a little bit better view. And for each of these shelves, I'm giving the glue just a couple minutes to set up before I move on to the next shelf. So our third shelf is going to go flush with the top or bottom of the side piece. So now you should have what looks like an E shape. Now you'll notice that the distance in between the shelves are not the same for each. One is a little bit narrower, and that's going to be an actual shelf, and then the deeper one will be an actual drawer. So from this point on, you'll need to pay attention to which one is the narrower and which one is the wider. So now that I have the shelves on one side of the piece marked A, I'm going to now add my second piece marked A onto the other side. So I'm adding glue here now onto the edge of all 3 of the shelf pieces. Then I'm just adding my second piece marked A to this side. Now I am going in and making sure that all 4 of the corners are nice and even. And since I'm not able to clamp these together, I'm going to go ahead and put some tape all the way around just to keep it nice and snug while the glue sets. The next step is to bring in piece marked F, which is your back piece. And I'm adding glue onto all of the top sides. And then we'll add the back piece marked F right on top. And again, adding some tape just to keep it nice and snug while the glue dries. So I'm going to put that piece to the side for a bit, and we're going to work on the base, which is of course what the nightstand is going to sit on. So you should have 1 piece marked G, that's the larger piece, then 2 pieces marked D and 2 pieces marked C. So I'm going to start by attaching the 2 D pieces, so these will be the shorter of these 4 sticks, onto the side of piece G. And these are actually going to sit on the outside, not on top of the base, but on the outside of the base. And these pieces should be the exact same length as the short side of your piece marked G. So I'll start by adding glue on the 2 short sides of piece marked G. Then I'll take my 2 pieces marked D and I'm just going to press them to each side. So here's just a little bit of a close-up so you can see how those pieces join together. And now we're going to glue it on to the bottom of the nightstand. And so just a reminder, make sure that you're gluing it to the right side because, as I said, one of those spaces is narrower than the other. All right, so this piece actually fits perfectly onto the bottom, but we're not going to glue it on flush with all of the edges. And I promise you there's a method to my madness here. So on the back, where you can see the seam between the sides of the nightstand and the back piece, that's where you want to line up the back of this base. You want to leave that little bit of a lip at the back, and then it's actually going to have a little bit of a lip in the front as well. Just in the front it's going to stick out a little bit, and in the back it's going to not go quite all the way to the back. All right, so a little bit of glue on the bottom of the nightstand, and I'm going to use my little glue spreader here to make sure that I get the glue all the way to the edges. so that everything is tacked down nice and firmly. Now I'm sure you've noticed that I still haven't glued on the two pieces marked C yet. I've just done those two side pieces D. The reason that I've done it that way is that I want to be able to clamp this base onto the nightstand itself. And if I had put the front and back pieces on already, I wouldn't be able to use the clamps. So I'm just kind of doing this in pieces as it kind of makes sense to me as far as making sure that there's no warping. I am going to still add some tape here onto the back side because my clamps aren't long enough to go all the way to the back. So I want to make sure that the back piece stays nice and tight as well. So I've let that dry a good long while, and so now I want to go ahead and add the back piece. So the back piece butts up against the two sides, should be flush along the bottom, and it's going to sit on that little bit of a ledge that we created in the back. You will see that there is a tiny bit of an overhang on the bottom. I did that on purpose. I just thought it looked a little nicer than having it straight flush across the back. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some glue here along this little ledge at the back. And then I'll also add a little bit to the short side of those pieces marked D. So I'm putting that aside to dry, and I'm going to work on the front piece. Now, this is completely optional. You don't have to do anything to this piece if you don't want to. You can just glue it on as is. But I've decided that I want to do a little bit more of a decorative cut along the bottom, and so I'll show you how I did that. So the first thing that I needed to find is the midway point on the short end of these pieces. So this piece is 5 millimeters wide, and so I just made a mark at the 2.5 millimeter on each side and drew a line across. Then I measured in from each side 2 marks, one at 5 millimeters and one at 7 millimeters. Then in that little 2 millimeter space, I drew a diagonal line, starting from the middle and going downwards and outwards towards the bottom. Now I'm going to cut out the piece in the middle at the bottom. So I'll make the diagonal cut where I've made those diagonal lines, and then I'll cut all the way down that line that I drew lengthways down the piece. So you should be left with a shape like this, and I'm going to go in and give this a really good sand so that it's nice and smooth. And now I can take that newly shaped piece and add it along the front. So I'm just adding some glue along the short ends of pieces marked D, and then a little bit along the edge of the base as well. And then I've just laid that piece along the front. I've lined it up on the two sides, and I've also made sure that that part that I cut out is facing down towards the bottom. And as I mentioned before, that front edge is going to stick out a fair ways from the rest of the cabinet, but once we get the drawer front on, it's all going to be fairly even. So now while this is all drying, I'm going to make the drawer itself. Now I have put the measurements in the cutting instructions, but I would caution you to not cut those pieces out until you reach this point, because you will want to measure the space that you have for the drawer, just to make sure that if you maybe put that shelf in either a little too high or a little too low, that you're compensating for that. So I always wait until this point to cut out anything for the drawer. So you can go ahead and measure your drawer opening and make your adjustments as you need to. So your drawer pieces are pieces marked H, which is your drawer bottom, one piece marked I, which is the back of the drawer, two pieces marked J, which are the sides of the drawer. We're not going to do the drawer front just yet. We're just going to build the three-sided box for the drawer. I also recommend that when you're cutting out the drawer bottom, don't make it the exact same size as your opening. You want to leave off about 2 millimeters. If it's too tight, you're going to have trouble getting the drawer in and out. So I like to leave a millimeter on either side just to make it easier for that drawer to move. So we'll start by putting the drawer back on first. So this is piece marked I, and it should be the same length as your drawer bottom. And we're just going to put some glue on one long edge, and it's going to sit on top of the base of the drawer. Once your back is in place, you can add your sides. So we'll add glue to one short side and one long side, and it is also going to sit on top of the base and just nestled in that L shape that's made by the base and the back. And then after you've glued in your third side, you should have an open three-sided box. Once that glue's had a chance to set, I would do a dry fit at this point and make sure that your drawer fits into the space and moves freely back and forth. So I'll do the drawer front next. So you'll need piece marked E and piece marked M. And what I've done on piece E is I have beveled off just the top edge all the way around this piece. I've done the same thing to piece marked M, but this is a very thin piece of wood, so you want to be very careful. You can't apply too much pressure or you'll break the wood. So just a very light sandpaper all the way around the top edge will work just fine. Then I'm going to glue piece M on top of piece E, and you'll see there's about a 2 millimeter space all the way around. I'm just eyeballing to make sure that it looks even, and then you'll want to go ahead and clamp those two pieces together, because especially that thinner piece will warp on you if you don't secure it down. Before I attach this to the drawer that we've made, I want to drill a little hole for the drawer knob to go in. I've measured out where the middle of the drawer front is, and I put a little dot there with my pencil, and that's where I will drill the hole. I'm not going to add the knob just yet. I want to paint the drawer front first. I'll put glue around all three of these sides. And then once I've got my glue on there, I'm just going to drop it back into its slot, and I'm going to add my drawer front while it's actually in place. That actually allows me to make sure that the drawer front is nice and straight and it's flush on the sides. Then you can flip the whole thing upside down while the glue is still wet. It should drop out into your hands, and then you can hold it in place until the glue has a chance to set. Now the last step of the construction is to make the tabletop. So you'll need 3 pieces marked K, L, and N as in Norman. And for each of these pieces, I've beveled off just the 2 short sides and 1 long side. I'm placing all of the pieces beveled side down and in order of size. And I'm going to start with the smallest piece, which should be your piece marked K. And I'm just going to start adding the pieces on top of it. So again, bevel side down, and I'm going to add piece marked L on top of piece marked K. I'm making sure that the long side that I didn't bevel is flush on all 3 pieces. So you'll have a tiny bit of an overhang on the 2 sides and then on the front, but the back of these 3 pieces when you're done should all be nice and flush together. So when you're done, the smallest piece will be on the bottom, and that's what we'll attach, and all of the bevels should go outwards and up towards the top. So I'm going to go ahead and glue these 3 together. I'm going to clamp them as I go so that nothing shifts or warps on me, and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. Now I have them all glued together, it's time to attach it to the top of the nightstand. So as you recall, there was one edge of these pieces that was not beveled, and I put those so that they're all flush onto the back. And I'm going to make sure that when I glue this on top that I'm making that back unbeveled edge flush with the back of the actual cabinet itself. And this is that straight edge that's going to go towards the back. So to keep that flush, I'm just laying it onto its back, and then I'm just eyeballing to make sure that the 2 sides are even. And once again, I'm going to clamp it all down until the glue dries. So that's the basic construction for this end table, but now I need to make some decisions on how I'm going to paint it. So this end table is going to sit up against a blue wall. So I want to paint it so that it of course stands out from the wall, but I also want to add a touch of the blue color to kind of tie it into the wall as well. So I've decided to paint the whole nightstand white, with the exception of the front piece of the door front. So this little decorative piece on the top, I'm going to paint blue. Just a couple of tips when you're painting this kind of furniture. If there's a drawer, I never paint the inside of the drawer. I always leave it as raw wood. And in this case, the spot where that drawer is going to be, you only want to put minimal paint in there. You'd be surprised at how just a couple of layers of paint can eat up that little bit of wiggle room that you need to make sure that that drawer goes in nice and smooth. So I'm only using 1 coat in where the drawer goes, but for the rest of the piece, I'm going to put 3 coats of paint on, plus I'm going to add a coat of satin Mod Podge just to finish it all and to protect it. But before we get to any painting, I want to get some filler and fill in some of these cracks. So I'm going to use this Dry Decks spackling to fill in all of those little cracks. I like this product because it goes on pink, but once it's completely dry, it changes to white. So there's no guesswork as to whether or not your spackling is dry enough to start your sanding. It's also very soft and easy to work with. And while you can certainly use some sort of an applicator, I find that just using my finger works the best. And I'm able to get it in all of the places that I need to be able to cover. So the filling is all done, and I've gone in and I've done all of the sanding to give it a nice smooth finish. So now I can go ahead and paint. So the final step in completing this little nightstand is to add the handle onto the drawer front. So I have found these very tiny little pearl-like beads, and I'm going to be using those and some tiny pins to create the pull handle. So I'll start by adding a little bit of glue onto the end of the pin, and then we'll push the pin into the bead. Once the bead is on, I'm going to add a little bit more glue onto the end of the pin, and then we just need to push the pin through the hole that we drilled into the drawer front. Now there is of course a lot of pin showing on the other side, so I'm just going to take my flush cutters and snip off the end. And if you find that that pin has still a little bit of a sharp edge, you can just go ahead and add a bead of wood glue or some kind of glue over top of it, let it dry, and that way you're not going to snag or scratch your finger or anything like that if you happen to touch it. So here's the finished nightstand. You can see that the drawer opens and closes quite easily. And I ended up actually making two of them because of course I wanted one for either side of the bed. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. I hope you like these little nightstands. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.